how to recognize passive-aggressive behaviour in other people, especially in the workplace. Hi, Kim here, Chartered Psychologist and Cognitive Behavioural Psychotherapist, and I'm here to help you with all your issues regarding how to become more assertive, the negative impacts that lack of assertiveness have on us, and also how to recognise and manage anxiety. In this video, I'm going to talk about 5 different ways we can recognise passive-aggressive people, but stay tuned to the end because I've got 5 tips for you of how to deal with them once we've started to recognise them and the impact on us and our wider workplace. So number 1, you may find they are bitter and quite hostile to requests which are made of them. And this can take the form of, you're sort of asking someone to do something, or your boss is asking them to do something, and they will argue the toss about everything. They feel put upon. You can tell that they really don't want to do this and are quite hostile and make everybody feel very, very uncomfortable. And this is usually passive-aggressive behaviour because they're not coming right out and saying, actually, I don't think that's a good idea, or actually, I don't have the capacity to do that. They will just make excuses, be hostile and bitter about the request which is being made of them, and it makes for a terrible atmosphere. The second way you can recognise passive-aggressive behaviour in the workplace is that they may delay finishing or giving reports, or they may just be late with things. They will say yes, they will complete a report, or they will hand in the work at a certain time, but then there'll be an excuse. Oh, I was running late, the kids were sick. Oh, there was a train strike. Oh, there was a rail strike. Oh, there was something or other going on, and I just wasn't able to do it. They won't just come straight out and say, actually, I didn't agree with it. I didn't think it was part of my remit, and I really didn't want to do it, or I didn't know how to do it. They will just make excuses and they will just not finish it. And that kind of almost derails everybody's part in the project because their bit isn't being done. So it adds pressure to everyone. And we all know people like that in the workplace who just seem to fly by the seat of their pants and just don't pull their weight. They're just not team players. The third thing they do is they don't speak up about issues that they have. If you're sitting in a planning meeting and somebody proposes something, they may not agree with it, but rather than voicing that opinion because they're terrified of conflict, they just go ahead with it. And they don't say anything. So you think that this person is on board and they've agreed to the plan, the time schedule, or whatever it is, but they then start to sabotage it, a little bit like number 2, where they miss deadlines, they're just not on board, but they still are not saying anything about it. You think they're on board, but behind the scenes, they're kind of working against the team. They're working against you, moaning and groaning, and just not getting on and doing what it is they need to do. They spend their time trying to undermine the plan. They'll miss deadlines, as we've said. They just won't turn up with things, or they won't turn up to the planning meetings. They'll always have an excuse. And you just know that this is undermining and sabotaging what it is the team are trying to achieve. And when they're like that, it's very, very difficult to kind of turn around and get them on side and to have a nice, cohesive, well-balanced team. Number 4, they won't tell you when they're annoyed or don't agree with something. They just stay silent and they give you the silent treatment and they sulk. You can tell they're sulking by their body language. They're just turning away from you. They don't engage. They are miserable and moody, and it is very, very, very difficult to work with these kind of people who are constantly in that mood. I know I've worked with colleagues and they would sit for hours and just not speak to you. You would walk in the morning and say good morning and nothing. Not a glimmer. They might mutter something under their breath, but they wouldn't actually turn and look you in the eye and speak to you. And you could tell that something was bothering them, but they just wouldn't say what it was. They kept it inside of them. They sulked and they were moody, and it made for a very, very, very unpleasant working environment. And when that's kind of going on, when they're behaving like that and they're very withdrawn from you, it's very difficult to discuss how a project is going or ask them for their part, or the information from them that you need to complete your part, or just to have a conversation about how things are going in general. And quite often really interesting discussions come out, sitting over your muffins and cup of coffee in the morning about how things are going. All sorts of ideas can kind of spring from that, but that doesn't happen when somebody is moody and sulking and withdrawn. They're withdrawing themselves from you. Very, very difficult. Number 5, they will tend to blame others for things. They won't take responsibility for being late. They won't take responsibility if they've made a mistake. It will always be somebody else's fault, or there's a reason why they couldn't do it when somebody else didn't do this or they didn't do that. And it's kind of a bit of a moaning culture. They will just moan about everybody, moan about things, and that over time can be very debilitating and very, it just stops for a pleasant working environment and stops you being able to combat things together as a team. Because quite often communication is a productive working of a team. If people are not communicating, whether if they're being passive aggressive or aggressive, this will actually stifle productivity in an organization. Also, it causes people to go off sick because other people get very stressed in that environment. So it has incredibly negative and detrimental effects on the project that you're doing, you as a person, and the organization as a whole. So how can we deal with these passive aggressive people? How can we start to turn things around or start to actually address this so it can make for a more pleasant work environment? Well, the first thing we need to do is kind of understand their motivation, because passive aggressive people, they're not bad people per se. It's just that that kind of behaviour has a detrimental effect on them and on the team as a whole. People often become passive aggressive because this is kind of learnt behaviour. They're fearful of speaking up, and they don't know how to handle things. So that kind of sits inside of them, and they just become passive aggressive. They just withdraw. They find a way to let you know that they don't want to do something or that they're unhappy, rather than actually having to tell you, because they probably have a terror and fear of conflict. So they won't overtly say, I don't agree with this, or I'm not able to do that, for fear of conflict. And this may have been something they've learned in the home. It may have been something they learned at school. If you've been a very strict school, it wasn't okay to speak up. So you kind of kept things in and bottled them up for yourself. But it really is coming from a place of fear. So if we can have compassion for that person and understand this is where they're coming from, it makes it much easier to help them to open up and to become more assertive in their communication. The second thing we can do is to not overreact. Because obviously when somebody's being very passive aggressive, it kind of, you think, oh my God, just get on with it. Stop being like this. Stop creating such an atmosphere. And it can make you feel quite angry yourself. But if you can understand their motivation, it will actually help you to keep your own emotions in check, because becoming aggressive with that person is not going to help the situation. It will just create hostility, and your projects and the workplace will become worse, much, much worse. Projects won't get done. Atmosphere will become a lot worse than it was before. So if you can keep your emotions in check and actually communicate with them from a place of compassion, as I said, you will find that you will get through to them much more easily in a much more pleasant way. It can be useful to actually script out what it is you want to say to them, how you're going to address this, and write it out and then role play it with someone, so that you are then approaching them with a very compassionate manner, firm, honest and compassionate. Don't use emotive language. Try and keep things very honest and factual based. They can't get you on the facts. The facts are the facts. So if you can keep it factual and feel compassion for that person, you'll find it much easier to communicate what it is you want to say to them. And the third thing is, you really need to be honest with the person, because if you're not honest with passive aggressive people, it's almost like you're condoning their behaviour. You're allowing them to get away with it in the long term, and that's not good for them, and it's not good for you, and it's certainly not good for the organisation. So you need to be honest about what it is, how it's bothering you, the effect it's having on you, using I statements. When you behave like that, I feel. When you behave like that, the impact is X on the project, means we're running late. But you're not accusing them of anything, and you can ask them, is there anything we can do to help you achieve this? Is there anything we can do to make this easier for you? How would you like to communicate this back to us? So you're using I statements, you're not accusing at all, and that's the most important thing, not to be accusatory. And this is the same in any relationship. If you start accusing people, like, when you do that, it makes me, no, it's about you. When you do that, I feel XYZ. You're owning your own feelings. You're not putting it on them. And the last thing is you need to build trust with the person. And that's sometimes easier said than done. But if you follow the other steps and you're understanding what their motivation is, you're being honest with them, you're trying to use I statements, you're not attacking them, and you've scripted out what you're going to say, they will actually see that you are being assertive, not aggressive, and you're telling the truth. You're meeting them in a place, because assertive communication is not trying to win at all costs. It's not a I've got to be the best, you've got to comply to me. No, it's a win-win. This is beneficial for me, but it's also beneficial for you. You're understanding the other person has rights just the same way that you do, and you're asking for them to actually meet you in the middle. And if you can do that and actually be honest and consistent, they will know that what you're saying is that you're always going to be honest to them. And so they won't find you a conflictual kind of person, because that's often with a passive aggressive person. They just don't want the conflict. It's what they fear the most, and they hate it, and they'll do anything not to get into the conflict. But they find it difficult to actually speak up and say what it is they want. So like I said, thinking about them in a more compassionate way can actually help you deal with the situation and help them to become more assertive. You are modeling the behavior that you want them to start to display. So those are 5 ways that passive aggressiveness kind of shows up in the workplace. And there are some suggestions of how you can actually start to manage passive aggressive people in work, or even out of work actually, because sometimes we might have passive aggressive friends. So if you found that helpful, please subscribe to my channel. Please share if you like to. Log on to my website, kimravel.com, where I have more information about different styles of communication. Go to my YouTube channel, where I've got lots of videos about assertiveness and about how to combat and recognize anxiety. Thank you for your company, and I'll see you in the next video.